Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to attend your e-school. But meanwhile, so my name is Isabel Batta Torheim. I work in the Ministry of Agriculture and Food in Norway. I have been working here for 11 years now. I'm the national focal point for the international treaty, which is one of the international instruments regulating this field. And I work on our national program on genetic resources. And before I joined the ministry, I worked in a Norwegian NGO called Development Fund, which also has a program on seed diversity, working both on policy advocacy in Norway and internationally, as well as supporting projects in the global south. So I was asked to share some experiences from Norway when it comes to farmers' seed system and the formal seed system. I will start with the overview of my presentation is then to start with how to understand farmer seed system and the formal seed system, and share an experience where we proposed this in the UN Food System Summit in 2021. So this is where I am, and first to then share some views on farmers and formal seed systems, and an initiative Norway had during the UN Food System Summit in 2021. And then also share some of the work being done in the international treaty in regards to farmers' rights, where there have been development of so-called options on how to strengthen farmer seed systems, and then finally share some examples on realizing farmers' rights and thereby also strengthening farmer seed systems in Norway. And this is one of many possibilities of illustrating the different seed systems, with the formal seed system to the left and presented as a linear approach, where the key features are that farmers are buying certified seeds that are distinct, uniform and stable, and that there are strict regulations about which varieties that can be registered, and that the breeding is mainly done by professional entities. It could be commercial or at universities, and when they have sold the harvest, they buy seeds for the next season. They do seed selections from their fields, and farm saved seeds either for their own use or shared through social networks or sold or bought at the local market are key features. And these systems are not separated, they are interlinkages, that they could be certified formal seeds within the farmer seed systems as well. Farmers often select and use and like to choose seeds according to their own preferences and what is suitable for their field. The linear formal seed system is a dominant seed systems in the global north, while the farmer seed systems is still a key source of seeds in many developing countries. In some countries in the global south, the farmer seed system accommodate for about 80 to 90% of the seeds, and the degree on the importance of farmer seed systems is also different depending on which crops. Even though farmer seed systems is a very important source of seeds in the global south, and also have some importance in global north, most policy, regulation, etc. are taking the formal seed system as a starting point and is accommodated in order to support the linear seed system, while there is less political attention and less consideration of the farmer seed systems within regulations and laws to support and strengthen the farmer seed systems. Because it's nothing like, none of these systems are perfect in themselves. They all need to be strengthened and supported to be improved. Possibilities to support farmer seed systems is to establish community seed banks and to have seed fairs and establish also seed producer groups among farmers, while the linear formal seed system could also accommodate better for also the farmer seed system by taking farmers' rights more into consideration. Putting farmers first in seed policy and practice was an initiative Norway proposed in 2021. The aim, in a way, is to ensure seed security. And FAO has defined seed security as existing when men and women within the household have sufficient access to quantities of available good quality seed and planting materials of preferred crop varieties at all times in both good and bad cropping seasons. And here is important both with what their preferred crop varieties are, that needs to be accommodated for, and also how we defined what is good quality seed. But it's important to then strengthen the voice of the farmers, like agency is important to empowering farmers to take active part in seed system development. And this, as I mentioned, was a proposal by Norway submitted to the UN Sustainable Food Systems Summit in 2021. During the work of the Food Systems Summit, it was a call to propose so-called game-changing proposals on how to strengthen the sustainability of food systems. And that's as part of this, Norway then proposed the game-changing proposal on putting farmers and indigenous peoples' access to crop diversity at center in seed policy and practice. So the aim was then to support a more systematic change towards a more bottom-up, demand-driven approach to complement the dominant top-down supply-side approach to seed systems, and also to find a better balance between the two approaches. Because then seed security, we believed, could better be addressed if the needs and preferences of different farmers in different agroecological and socioeconomic situation is a starting point. And this game-changing proposal was developed by a network then in Norway among participants from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Food and Agriculture, NORAD, which is our development agency, research institutes and farmers' organizations, as well as civil society organizations. One of the participants in this network was Regine Andersen, pictured here, who is a researcher in Norway who has specialized in farmers' rights. I'm sharing also a link to the web page she has established where she is collecting a lot of research on farmers' rights. And farmers' rights are basically means enabling farmers to maintain and develop crop genetic diversity and recognizing and rewarding them for this indispensable contribution to the global pool of genetic resources and to local and global food security. I'm also sharing a link here to a presentation she recently made where she will go more into depth into farmers' rights and farmer seed systems, in case some might be interested to look into that later. And Norway shared this game-changing proposal also to the international treaty. The next speaker will speak more about the international treaty, which is the global instrument that is recognizing farmers' rights to seeds. And one initiative in order to improve implementation of farmers' rights is that the treaty has developed an inventory where all contracting parties and other stakeholders can share experiences on how to implement farmers' rights. Currently, there are 233 measures there, and I'm sure there is room for more. It's an ongoing an open invitation to share experiences on how to realize farmers' rights using a template about what is the interesting features to be covered in these submissions. So I will encourage all participants at this school as well to consider sharing experiences from your country, because that together creates a very valuable knowledge base for inspiration to others. And based on the current content in the inventory, an expert group on farmers' rights in the treaty developed options, so-called options for encouraging, guiding and promoting the realization of farmers' rights as set out in Article 9 of the International Treaty. And several of these options are strongly linked to also then strengthening farmer seed systems. For example, category 6 about facilitating of farmers' access to diversity of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture through community seed banks, seed networks and other methods, improving farmers' choices of a wider diversity of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture is strongly linked to also then supporting farmer seed systems. And it's within these options, the last one here, that also the Norwegian game-changing proposal is listed as an example. Another category of measures are legal measures. These are measures, some would consider the most important ones. It's the laws and regulations deciding what is allowed and also what is then being promoted in a way. And is also then options maybe that is the strongest kind of challenge to the commercial sector and private actors in the seed sector, because it's challenging their share of the seed market. So the expert group did not manage to get a final agreement on the content of these options. Therefore, it was decided that when these options are presented, they need to be kind of called the co-chairs proposal. And I was one of the co-chairs together with Dr. Rakesh Agrawal from India. And these options are one is about realizing farmers' rights within national legislation, administrative and policy framework at the bit overall level. And there is one option about realizing farmers' rights through reviewing and as appropriate adjusting intellectual property law and related procedures, and as well as reviewing and adjusting seed laws, and reviewing and adjusting national laws for access and benefit sharing, and also studies on national and international policies and laws regarding contributions for the realization of farmers' rights. Under all these options in the document, there are also some examples where you could go more into details. And Norway has submitted experiences from Norway on both option B and C. So I will share that now, but then very briefly about the Norwegian context, because agriculture in Norway is a very small activity, only 3% of our land is arable. So our agriculture is mainly for domestic consumption, and it's important for the rural economy, but still we import at least more than half of our food. And the climate conditions are also challenging. We have a short growing season with cold temperatures and mountainous area. But we have like strong farmers organizations, civil society organizations, and research institutes engaged in this issue about farmers' rights and farm seed systems. And also, as evident with the joint game-changing proposal, we have a close cooperation between private, public, and civil society organizations in this field. In Norway, modern varieties are predominantly used, and most likely we have lost quite a lot of many traditional varieties. Regina Andersen did a mapping of land races in Norway in 2011, so we do have some varieties, and many of the land races and traditional varieties that are kept are conserved in our joint Nordic gene bank. Norway does not have its own separate national gene bank, but we collaborate closely with our the other Nordic countries. So we have 5 countries having a joint gene bank. And the diversity of farmers' varieties conserved in the gene bank is trying to also be made more accessible to farmers through Norwegian Seed Bank, where they multiply the seeds, because if you try to get access or want some seeds from the gene bank, you get this in very small quantities. So it's not very practical to start using, then you need many generations. So the Norwegian Seed Bank is providing land races of a bit higher quantities, so farmers could start using them in their field. And also Kvann, Norwegian Seed Savers, is a civil society organization that has established networks of seed savers within many traditional crops, but also importing things of interest. And now I will share one example in Norway. It's related to plant variety release, regulation of this. Usually these regulations put quite strict regulations on which varieties you are allowed to put on the market, and the key objective is to ensure that farmers will buy only good quality seeds without diseases. But until 2004, there were few limitations on farmers' rights to save, use, and exchange and sell farm-saved seeds. But then in 2004, Norway implemented some of the seed regulation of the European Union. Norway is not a member of the European Union, but we have an economic agreement making us having obliged to implement a lot of the regulation from EU regarding the economic market, and seed issue is part of this. And by implementing some of the seed regulation of EU, the Food Safety Authority had a very rigid interpretation of the EU regulation. So it became prohibited to give away and exchange and sell seeds because of the very rigid definition of commercial use. It says also if it was without any payment. And this created gradually huge concern among farmers and gardeners and civil society, as well as researchers and Regina. And they advocated for change in this regulation. And also EU later on passed regulation on conservation varieties, which had the aim to have more flexibility regarding which varieties were allowed to be registered and to in order to be allowed to be put on the market, you need to be registered. So this facilitated for a more broader diversity to be put on the market, and this created also a possibility to revise the Norwegian legislation. And to the purpose of the revision was to better accommodate the use of wider diversity of plant varieties and thus ensure sustainable use of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. So even though a key purpose of the seed regulations are often to ensure good quality seed to the farmer that is free of diseases, it's also put here as a key purpose to also to contribute to the diversity and ensure sustainable use of PGRFA. So then with this revision, it becomes a better balance between farmers' rights in seed regulations, and farmers were now again allowed to exchange seeds and also to give away or sell seeds of non-commercial basis. And the regulation also made it a bit easier to be registered as a seed company, because it's a requirement in the seed laws that you need to be registered as a seed company in order to be allowed to provide for seeds. And the condition to be registered if you are engaged with traditional varieties in a small scale, the rules were accommodated to make it easier. And also the criteria for which plant varieties to be approved were made easier. Another example is related to intellectual property rights, then specifically plant variety protection. And Norway became a member of UPO, which is one of the international instruments in this field, which is the union on plant variety protection. And Norway became a member in 1993, and then it was decided that we would adhere to the 1970 Act. This act is more flexible when it comes to the possibilities for countries to also recognize farmers' rights to farm-saved seeds. But in 2005, it was a discussion in Norway, because the government had proposed that Norway should change its Plant Breeders' Rights Act and to join the 91 Act of the UPO Convention. But this created strong reactions from farmers' organizations and others, because it could limit the farmers' rights to use farm-saved seeds. And the condition in Norway, what happened was that in autumn time it was an election, and a new government won that election, and they decided to reject the proposed changes in the plant variety protection legislation, arguing that it was better to keep the current one, because that would keep a better balance with farmers' rights, and to ensure that farmers still have the right to save, use and exchange farm-saved seeds of propagated varieties without any remuneration to the plant breeder. But then it is a challenge in a way, because we need plant breeding forever. Farmers are also reliant on the development of improved crops. So at the same time, part of, in a way, the government decision to keep the current Plant Breeders' Rights Act, they also increase the financial support to breeding. So we are combining the legal measure with the financial measures. And I started brief introduction of the condition in Norway. We have a very small agriculture sector. We have difficult climate conditions with short summers with very you might have heard about the midnight sun. So we have very short season, but with a lot of light, very special conditions. So we need plant breeding adjusted to these conditions. So it is a balance as well, how to manage to finance breeding, accommodated our needs here. But Norway is committed to farmers' rights. We are trying to balance these concerns within both the plant variety protection legislation as well as in the seed legislation. And we engage actively in the plant treaty on the issue of farmers' rights. The plant treaty is also operationalizing access and benefit sharing through its multilateral system on access and benefit sharing. And they have established a fund for benefit sharing. And Norway gives an annual contribution to the treaty's benefit sharing fund based on national annual seed sales in Norway. And we also try to engage both in the treaty and UPO, trying to find the best possible interrelations between these two instruments. We both need to conserve and sustainably use plant genetic resources and recognize farmers' rights that are important in the treaty, as well as to supporting plant breeding also through then protection of plant varieties, which is a key purpose of UPO. And Norway also supports civil society organizations working in this field, like Development Fund, where I used to work. And we have included farmers' rights in our national strategy on conservation and sustainable use of genetic resources for food and agriculture. Farmers' rights, as mentioned, are recognized in the international treaty, but it will be implemented domestically. So you need to adjust it to your national context. And we have tried to operationalize farmers' rights in a Norwegian context to be facilitating access to good quality breeding material, which is adapted to local production conditions and meeting farmers' various needs and preferences, increasing farmers' possibilities to be involved in and have influence on priorities in plant and livestock breeding, supporting measures to preserve, protect and develop traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources, increasing farmers' possibilities to participate in relevant decision-making processes, as well as securing the right to use farm-saved seeds and farm-bred livestock, and promoting farmers' rights to store, use, exchange and sell farm-saved seed. So, but still, one of our goals with the national strategy is also to have a bit more systematic approach on on-farm management, which is still work in progress. So, some of the lessons learned in Norway is that when we are adjusting legislation on both seed legislation and intellectual property rights, particularly plant breeders' rights, are important for the realization of farmers' rights, as well as then strengthening farmer seed systems. And in doing this, it's important also to have farmers' organizations and civil society and researchers being part in this work, sharing their experiences and challenging the government if that is needed, at least putting it also on the agenda. And it's also, in addition to legal measures, it's also very important with financial measures in order to support breeding. All the inventory and options developed by the expert group.
Thank you very much indeed, Isabel. Thank you very much, Isabel. Dear esteemed participants, we have just profoundly witnessed how truly complex and intricate the interaction is between both fundamental systems, the formal and the informal family systems, operating across diverse cultures and societies around the entire world. And we have seen the direction of policies aimed at protecting farming systems, specifically informal farming systems in Norway. I would like to clearly highlight the very distinct illustration of what both fundamental models of functioning truly look like. The formal one is notably more linear, meaning it inherently has its own established process from initial production to final sales, while the informal one is considerably more complex, not only in terms of its operational functioning, but also profoundly in terms of its very existence, since it intrinsically includes significant aspects of social and cultural heritage. And one of the absolutely main and most crucial aspects of this entire endeavor is the comprehensive protection of the fundamental rights and inherent dignities of the hard-working farmers themselves, ensuring their well-being and sustainable livelihoods. A very important and indeed crucial point was made that both of these distinct systems absolutely cannot exist in a truly healthy and sustainable sense. And moreover, they fundamentally cannot exist without each other, because the principle of mutual exclusion, when applied here, inevitably leads to significantly negative and undesirable consequences for all involved parties. And it is profoundly important and indeed crucial when the various levels of governance, specifically the individual state governments, comprehensive national legislation, and influential international bodies and organizations commence the critical process of establishing and enforcing robust regulatory frameworks and oversight mechanisms for these increasingly complex and pervasive systems. As Isabella said, it is very important to balance them, since we need to consider the impact of various regulations. And it should be explicitly stated and widely understood that since informal family systems are intrinsically and profoundly related to fundamental human rights, let us also take this opportune moment to mention our recently adopted, in the year 2018, Declaration on the Comprehensive Protection of the Inherent Rights of Peasants and other individuals working in rural areas, including those in similar vulnerable situations. People were also engaged in various other types of activities within rural areas. So here we already have, even though the document is not yet binding for the states that have adopted it, we have an official document that we can refer to in terms of concepts. And here we already have, in fact, the very fundamental concept of the right to seeds, both in a rather broad and more specific sense. And taking this valuable opportunity, I would like to give the floor to Fulya Batur, a distinguished lawyer and junior researcher at the esteemed Geneva Academy, who will meticulously focus in her comprehensive presentation on the intricate international regulations regarding peasants' rights to seeds. Fulya, the floor, are you present here today? Present.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, and also for welcoming me in this e-school. And also thank you to Bell for having set the scene so well and having shown you how a country can act and guide the way towards the support and fulfillment of farmers' rights to seeds. What I will do now is more to give you an overview of how international law looks at farmer seed systems. So you have already heard a lot about from Bell about the international treaty, about UPOV, and now I hope that you will get a bigger picture of everything, of all the instruments that exist. And then in the other modules of the e-school, you will dig further into certain topics. Okay, so here you are. So since the beginning of agriculture, seed access, use and exchange has been unfettered. So we estimate that we've domesticated seeds about 10,000 years ago, and ever since then, they've always moved around. And the diversity of the varieties we have is the result of a long-term collective management and exchange of seeds and knowledge. And that is also why you need international action. Okay, so because the standalone action in a specific territory can only do so much when you have so much interdependence and exchange and collective management. I will explain the different instruments in the way they view and give rights and also obligations to farmers, to states, and the seed industry. Our little seeds are also agents of agriculture, nature, culture, and industry. So the seeds, they shape agricultural and food systems, but they also connect people and cultures, and there's a very strong cultural attachment to it, and there's also knowledge attached to seeds about these. But it's also an important industry. The EU seed industry is valued at about 10 billion euros. And what is, I think, interesting in that figure is that only 5 countries represent 2/3 of that 10 billion value. So it's France, Germany, the Netherlands, Spain, and Italy, if I'm not mistaken. So 2/3 of 10 billion in 5 countries out of 27. Seeds also provide environmental value. They have environmental value on their own, and the diversity between species, within species, provide ecosystem services that are interesting. In this sense, if you're interested, I urge you to consult the latest State of the World for Biodiversity for Food and Agriculture, where it's a great publication available on the internet, where you can see where we are in terms of biodiversity for food and agriculture, not just on seeds, but also on animals and also microorganisms, and how they're collectively managed, preserved, and sustainably used. Our little seeds are also extremely regulated little resources. I don't like to use the term resources, but it is the term that is used in the law, and they are extremely regulated. Some instruments they want to conserve the seeds, so they have this environmental focus more on it. Some want to prevent the risk, and protect human health, because seeds can carry diseases as living organisms, but they're also market tools. So their use are shaped by agricultural policy, food policy, and also other types of market tools. So in terms of conservation, we have policies that aim to conserve biological diversity and also regulate access to those resources and share the benefits from the uses that arises from them. I'm going to get to this and you're going to understand, but I just wanted you to look at the different types of laws that can affect the use of seeds. Then seeds are also viewed as a risk, as a potential bearer of diseases. So you will have or risks to human health. So you will have rules that ensure that the seeds that are circulating, whether informally or formally, don't carry diseases with them. So you have plant health legislation, and you have at the WTO, so World Trade Organization level, the SPS agreement, so sanitary and phytosanitary agreement, and also other types of agreements in place. You also have food safety frameworks and the Cartagena Protocol, which is linked to the Convention on Biological Diversity. And in terms of market tools, we have intellectual property rights, which provide an artificial monopoly to inventions or plant varieties as a whole, and seed marketing rules. Here, the idea is not to provide an artificial monopoly, but it's to say which seeds of which varieties will be part of the formal market and under which conditions. Okay, so for you to understand it, I thought the best way was to create a historical timeline so that you kind of try to understand the dynamics between instruments that look at state rights, but also give state obligations, those who have the primary focus in their seed industry, and those who also have provisions on farmers' rights. Okay, the first ones the first instruments that impact farmer seed systems have come after the Second World War. It is what Bell also referred to. It's the UPOV Convention. So it's the Union for the Protection of Plant varieties. Okay, I think it's interesting. You're going to have a module on this, but it's interesting for you to know that this convention was convened only with a few European industrialized countries, and it was requested by the International Seed Federation of the time, ASINCEL. So we are post-Second World War, under production, we need to produce, so we need more productivity. And plant breeders have come and said, okay, I am investing this much into developing a new variety. It takes a long time, it takes 10 years, it's an uncertain process, it's a very costly process. Now I need a tool that gives me an advantage in the market for the varieties that I have developed. So this is how we come with the concept of a plant variety protection. Okay, so the intellectual property rights in general, they give you an artificial monopoly, knowing that a monopoly is not good for the market. But we say, so for 20 to 25 years, you will have exclusive rights over a plant variety. Okay, so you can say to your competitor that that person cannot use your variety or get too close to your variety, so that you recuperate all of the investment that has gone into it. So we have the first UPOV convention in 1961, then it's reinforced a little bit in 1978. Okay, it's going to be reinforced again after, but in the meantime, in 1983, we have something happening that is not just for the seed industry, but it's also a bit of a reaction to everything that was happening also at UPOV level and in other fora. It is the International Undertaking on Plant Genetic Resources. It's a non-binding instrument. I will get more into it. But the idea here is to say seeds are common heritage and everyone needs to access it. Okay, and everyone needs to access that diversity, whether it's breeders, so the seed industry, whether it's public breeders, whether it's gene banks, whether it's farmers. So the notion is that because seeds are interdependent, they're exchanged internationally, we need to treat them differently and we have to provide access. The UPOV Convention, which is the plant variety protection, it as we call it a hybrid in IP law, in intellectual property law, because it's not as strong as a patent. You have a lot of access possibilities for breeders. So it's kind of an open source IP. You can maybe look at it this way to understand it easily. So after the international undertaking, UPOV 3.0 has appeared in 1991, and that was a huge shift. And it's also why, the Bell was talking about the Norwegian choice not to ratify UPOV 1991, because it's a big shift. The rights of breeders are not just against their competitors anymore. They have also extended to multiplication. So it essentially means that farmers cannot multiply, so use the seeds of protected varieties. That's a huge shift. And the only thing that exists in UPOV 1991, it is an optional privilege for farmers to save, use, and exchange seeds of a protected variety. They can't even exchange, it's a bit gray. It has to maybe in their own holding, etc. So there are a lot of conditions for farmers to be able to use the seeds of protected varieties other than just purchasing and cultivating them, growing, and then selling the produce of it. Okay. Big second shift. So 1990s, it's a big time for international law in terms of farmers' rights. The Convention on Biological Diversity is adopted in 1992. It's also a very strong paradigm change, because here we're not talking about seeds as common heritage anymore. States have now sovereign rights over genetic resources. So it's kind of a reaction to the privatization of seeds through the UPOV conventions and also the patent regime that existed in the US. And they're saying, no, but states, we have the right to control our resources. You have been using it in developing varieties. We have not seen any benefit from it. Now we can control access and we can stop biopiracy. And in this idea of stopping biopiracy, farmers have been recognized to have traditional knowledge. It's linked to indigenous and local communities, but farmer communities are recognized as local ones in almost all of the literature. In 1994, a reaction to the Convention on Biological Diversity is the World Trade Organization TRIPS agreement, so the trade-related intellectual property rights agreement. And here, essentially, what the WTO is saying, okay, if you want to be part of my big club of world trade, liberalized trade, well, you at least need to protect plant varieties through patents or any form of sui generis effective protection. And that's usually understood as UPOV. It's not the only way you can do it, but it's generally understood like this. Then we had this agreement, international undertaking in 1983, which was non-binding. And because now states have sovereign rights, you cannot have this idea of common heritage anymore. So in 2004, the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture was adopted. Here we're talking about a binding agreement that still is in the idea that states have sovereign rights, but through that sovereignty, they decide that the access to plant genetic resources for food and agriculture has to be multilateral and facilitated. And this is where we talk about farmers' rights. Okay, that's the Article 9 that Bell referred to. It has to be subject to national law. It's not a universally written in its language, but it's Article 9, farmers' rights, formal recognition in 2004. And then we have the latest development in 2018, which is a real human rights instrument. It's the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and People Working in Rural Areas. And here states don't have necessarily sovereign rights. They just have an obligation to support, to respect, protect, fulfill the human rights to seeds and to support peasant seed systems. And you have a holistic approach to human rights. I'm going to break those down, don't worry. But it was to give you a linear and historical approach to how different instruments are affecting actually farmer seeds and farmer seed systems. So I'm going to mostly talk about these three fora at the United Nations level that address farmer seeds. So you have the FAO instruments, which look at access, multilateral access generally, and farmers' rights. You have UNEP instruments, so the United Nations Environment Programme instruments, the Convention on Biological Diversity. This is where we have traditional knowledge rather than farmers' rights. Then UNDROP as a human right to seeds for peasants and people working in rural areas. Okay. So the first instrument, as I said, is in 1983, where the states have to view seeds as common heritage of mankind. However, the instrument is non-binding. It is only for plant genetic resources of economic social interest. The idea, is that the seeds need to be available without restriction. So we're in 1983, we're reacting to the first two UPOV conventions, so plant variety rights. And the idea is both modern varieties and primitive varieties. This is the language used now in the international undertaking. So that's land races, farmers' varieties. They need to be available to all. They have to be accessed by all without restriction. So that you see the tension between plant variety protection, where you're giving this monopoly, and then we're saying, but actually seeds are common heritage of mankind, so they should be accessed freely. You cannot actually have a real monopoly on it. So that's why it's also non-legally binding as an undertaking. But it's a great read. I also found it interesting because we're talking in the 1980s that there wasn't that much consciousness about the genetic erosion and the biodiversity crisis that we know now. So the focus is really much about access and use and exchange rather than an obligation to conserve and to invest in the sustainable use of resources. It's really about access. Okay, and that's why they're not talking about farmers' rights. You don't have a direct provision on farmers. It's all an indirect consequence of the concept of free exchange. So you have a right to access diversity, whether it's modern varieties or old ones, and develop them, use them, adapt them to local conditions, etc. So it's the conflict between plant breeders' rights and farmers' rights is addressed, but only in an agreed interpretation of the international undertaking, where they try to bring down the fact that you can only have minimum restrictions on free exchange. So intellectual property rights cannot restrict too much the rights of farmers to access diversity. And the farmers' contribution to the conservation and development of plant diversity is also recognized. But the big shift is happening in 1993. So with the adoption of the Convention on Biological Diversity, here we're talking about a binding treaty with 196 party states. So it's really looked at encompassing most of the countries recognized by the United Nations. And you have a Nagoya Protocol that was adopted in 2014, which looks at one or two, it implements specific articles of the Convention on Biological Diversity. The idea here is that states have sovereign rights over genetic resources, but the idea is also that we need to conserve biodiversity and we need to recognize the contributions and the services that are provided by genetic diversity. So there's a sense of urgency, okay? And that the genetic diversity needs to be conserved because it provides climate stability, because it contributes to food security, it has healthy benefits on soil, it's also an innovative segment. So there is a need to act. How do states act? So they need to provide action plans on biodiversity, etc. Farmer seed systems is that they create this linkage between we have a pool of genetic resources and it's been used. It's used in research, it's used in food, feed, medicine, cosmetics, etc. So we need to bridge the gap. And so what they say is states have sovereign rights over genetic resources, and then they can regulate the access to those seeds and to the traditional knowledge. That means, so as you see up, you have access, you need to have a permit, a bilateral contract to access and use resources and knowledge. So you need the prior informed consent of the state and of the traditional knowledge holders, which can be farmers, by the way. And you can only use it under mutually agreed terms. That's very long terms to say you need a contract, you need a permit, and you need a contract, okay, to be able to use. And then if you use, so your research or your product development program generates benefits, then you share it back, okay? There's no more free riding, there's no more biopiracy. Okay, that's the general idea of the CBD. In terms of farmers, it's indirect, as I said. There is a formal recognition of the role that is played by indigenous and local communities in the conservation of biodiversity conservation. So ex situ conservation happens in gene banks, so outside of the place where they were developed. In situ conservation of genetic resources is on the fields, in gardens, you're seeing it adapted to its natural environment. And that's on the basis of this article that we have the Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing. What is important in those instruments is really this notion of traditional knowledge. Okay, that is then going to impact and has impacted the clauses of the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources. So here, this is the legal binding agreement that has been born from the international undertaking. But we're changing paradigm. We've changed paradigm. States have sovereign rights now. So seeds cannot be common heritage anymore because you have sovereignty over it. So what do they say? The treaty says, on the basis of state sovereignty, access and the use of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, let's just say seeds, if it's easier for you, needs to be facilitated. Okay, and how do they facilitate that? They facilitate it with a basic contract. It's a standard contract called the SMTA with built-in benefit sharing provisions where you get it for free. The seeds, you get it for free. So if you've ever, for instance, tried to get material from a gene bank, usually all international gene banks from the centers from international agricultural research, they use the standard material transfer agreement. So it's a viral contract. Once you get the seeds on the basis of an SMTA, you have to give it back on the basis of an SMTA, but it's free. Okay, so and it's they're creating a pool, a common pool of resources only for certain crops and variety that are under state control. So contrary to the international undertaking, here we're not talking about modern varieties. You don't have those UPOV protected varieties in this system as such. You might have the progeny of it or the past of it, but you won't have those modern varieties inside. So it's only for the varieties under state control. And that's also because of this notion of sovereignty. The big change is for farmers. It is the recognition, so building on the recognition of traditional knowledge in indigenous and local community on farmers' rights, okay, and state obligation to realize those rights. So the contracting parties have a responsibility to realize them, subject to national legislation to protect and promote farmers' rights. So Bello has already given you a lot of resources. Regina's work is great on this, where she really breaks down the different aspects of farmers' rights. So you have the protection of traditional knowledge. And traditional knowledge doesn't need to be old knowledge. It's dynamic. It's been called traditional, but you can view it also as something local that belongs to local communities. It doesn't need to be something that dates back hundreds of years. You can have new traditional knowledge that's held by local communities because they've learned something about a land race that adapts to mountainous regions. It's not a static old thing, an old knowledge, in books full of dust. It can be something new too. You also have the right to equitably benefit share. So look, the contracts, the SMTA, there's benefit sharing. So Belle was saying that Norway projects, etc. And then the right to participate in decision making. And nothing shall use, exchange, and farm saved seeds. Okay? It has to be subject to national law, but it's rights to save, use, exchange, and sell farm saved seed. That's the core of it. So I just wanted to give you two little examples in the inventory. So I really looked at legal measures because we're talking about implementation policy instruments. So first, you have examples everywhere. I really urge you to look at this inventory. There are great examples of projects, of different support mechanisms, etc. But these are examples of how the laws can be drafted in support and respect of farmers' rights. So after all of these instruments, these are all of the binding instruments that we have. Okay, it's complex and it has inherent tensions between each of them, because some instruments really focus and look at seed industry priorities and needs, because they need these tools to recuperate investment, and that's how their business model has been set up. But you also have state rights, state obligations, and then rights and obligations, mostly rights, to traditional knowledge holders and farmers. I wanted to showcase, so I'm going to talk about another report as well, but this is the first report that was done by a rapporteur on the right to food, Olivier de Scuter, in July 2009, where the idea was looking at how seed policies could contribute to the realization of a human right to food and the right to enjoy the benefits of scientific process. So it's the first time this human rights discourse has been infused into instruments that came from the Food and Agricultural Organization and the United Nations Environment Program. Okay, so it's a different way of looking at seeds. And if you're having this human rights discourse, there's a state obligation for all human rights to respect, protect, and fulfill. Okay, human rights. So it goes a bit further. And the discussion then evolved quite quickly, but also with the hard work, tremendous work of the Via Campesina at international level, so the global peasant movement. Okay, and we have a United Nations declaration in 2018. Okay, on the rights of peasants and other people working in rural areas. It's a non-binding instrument because it's a human rights declaration, but you have primacy of human rights. So all existing laws need to be interpreted in light of human rights. Even if the declaration is non-binding, even if countries at the Human Rights Council have not voted positively for the declaration applies because human rights are universal. So you cannot pick and choose like a convention, like a treaty, if you adhere to them or not. Okay? And you have, therefore, automatic state obligations to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. And in Article 19, which I suggest you read, there's a very nice holistic approach to farmers' rights. It's not just access, like it was in the international undertaking. It's not just traditional knowledge. You actually have a very holistic approach to it. To rights, land, water, social protection. And I wanted to give this because I don't know how it is in your region, but the word peasant has sometimes quite negative connotations attached to it. But now with the UNDROP, so with this declaration, it is changing. And peasant is in the declaration defined as any person who seeks to engage, alone or in association with others, as a community, but they engage in small-scale agricultural production for subsistence and who rely significantly on family and household labor or other monetized way of organizing labor, and with a special dependency and attachment to the land. So you can actually, a lot of people can be peasants, and it's also about people working in rural areas. Okay, so it's a very holistic approach. Here, states, we're not talking about sovereign rights, we're not talking about common heritage, we're talking about state obligation to respect, protect, fulfill a human rights and support peasant seed systems. So you need to promote, as a state, the use of peasant seeds and agrobiodiversity. So it goes much more than just looking at intellectual property rights and UPOV, like Belle was saying this morning. It's about providing a context and a framework where peasants have a choice between the commodity seed market and commercial varieties and the land races. They have choice, essentially. And their farmer seed systems, peasant seed systems, are supported and reinforced. Participate in decision making. That also means in formal consultation, usually direct link in our head is that all the laws that exist, whether intellectual property rights, so patents, UPOV, or seed marketing, they need to respect and take into account all elements of the rights to seeds. What are the rights to seeds? Okay, so I was talking about a holistic approach. You have the same wording that is in the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources, the right to save, use, exchange, and sell farm-safe seeds. But it's much more than that. It's also the right to maintain, control, develop their own seeds. So it's a supportive system for peasant seed systems. The right to have access to locally adapted seeds. So it means that your seed market needs to provide for avenues to commercialize seeds that are not just uniform, that are not just developed for the commercial crop production. Then you have the right to participate in decision making and the right to protect, the right of protection of traditional knowledge and the sharing of benefits. Okay, so very holistic approach. What we usually hear when I'm talking about UNDROP is that because it's a non-binding declaration, it doesn't have legal effect. That's far from true. You can visit this website, defendingpeasantrights.org, that is maintained by a lot of associations and especially also the Via Campesina. And this example is quite speaking and telling because it's about what has been coined the Monsanto law, which is actually UPOV 1991 and also very strict seed marketing legislation. And the Monsanto law has been actually overturned and by the Honduras Supreme Court in 2023. And in that judgment, the Supreme Court refers to UNDROP and its Article 19. So it can be used even in the EU or even in places where the UNDROP has not been voted positively by a government at the United Nations Human Rights Council. In terms of, this is part of the research that I'm doing with Christophe Collet at the Geneva Academy. And we have essentially broken down what the UNDROP means in Europe. Okay, so it's a practical manual where we say, okay, what does it mean to have the right to save, use, sell their own seeds? What types of legislation needs to change, etc.? What type of policy and legal action needs to be undertaken so that we are achieving, getting close to the right to seeds in Europe. And last but not least, because things have not changed that much and there's so much work to be done, this is the latest report of the new rapporteur on the right to food, Michael Thackeray, in 2021. And essentially, so he goes a bit further than Olivier Discuteur, because when Olivier Discuteur was writing and doing his research, you didn't have UNDROP. Now that we have UNDROP, Michael Thackeray is essentially asking how a framework that advances farmers and indigenous people's rights, how could that framework look like? Okay, and how do we ensure that we have biodiverse seed systems? And he opposes, kind of, not completely because you have interlinkages, the farmers and the commodity seed system. But also he clearly states that UPOV 1991 is in violation of farmers' rights. So a lot of food for you for thought, and you don't be scared because you're gonna have great modules that look into the more detailed.
Julia, thank you very much for the rather detailed presentation on the evolution of international instruments for regulating seed rights. And the main overarching conclusion we can definitively draw now is that formal seed systems are indeed highly regulated, and the fundamental rights of investors, that is to say their economic and commercial rights, are very thoroughly and comprehensively protected, which ultimately and inevitably leads to the significant restriction of the essential rights of peasants and smallholder farmers who primarily belong to informal, traditional seed production systems. And, in fact, the significant and widespread adoption of the Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas has already profoundly allowed the global peasant and farmer community to speak not just about the mere existence of such a fundamental and essential right, but also, crucially, about its practical implementation and its full, complete and effective realization in everyday practice. In addition to the instruments themselves, such as legally binding declarations and comprehensive agreements, we also have authoritative interpretations from the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, and the esteemed High Council for Human Rights, which meticulously specify and thoroughly interpret the fundamental right to thousands of individuals and communities, ensuring its comprehensive application and understanding across various contexts and situations. It explicitly states that one of the absolutely essential and fundamental points is that farmers must possess the full and complete potential to effectively exercise their inherent rights and entitlements. This fundamentally means that the inherent right to freely exchange and sell seeds must be unequivocally guaranteed and actively protected by the state, and it is precisely within this crucial context that the further comprehensive development and meticulous elaboration of pertinent international instruments will undoubtedly continue to progress, encompassing both practical application and the intricate legal practice, specifically within the vital field of diligently protecting the fundamental rights of peasants concerning their seeds. And finally, I would like to confirm that UNDROP, the Declaration on the Rights of Peasants, is a significant advancement in this area, and we hope for further progress and are convinced that the continued development and strengthening of peasants' rights within informal systems will continue to advance.
We were presented, but in Norway there are two very well functioning systems of formal and informal seed production. Yeah, I would like to know, does the state, the governmental or some state authorities has some role in functioning informal system? For instance, it can be monitoring, inspection, or no any role. And second question is where the or farmer associations in Norway, which engage it not only in primary seed production, elite and super elite seeds, but also not only in secondary but also in primary seed production. So is there in Norway any farmers or any farmer or any farmers organization which produce elite and super elite seeds?
During, like I said, like we had a period where it was like prohibited to use farm-saved seeds and exchange seeds. Then those farmers who are engaged in traditional varieties, they did anyway. So they are like not so strict regulations. So I would say that in Norway, the formal system is very well regulated, like all details are regulated, and the control is we call it usually like trust-based. So they don't control everything or every field or every farmer, but they could suddenly be do inspections. So that is how in general the control system in Norway works. The difficulties of doing inspections when this is in so small quantity as well was one of the motivation for the Food Safety Authority to make it easier for smaller entities to register as seed enterprises as well, and to facilitate this, to make it legal, because it will be very difficult to monitor as well. And it's also linked to the experiences that it is not spreading. We don't have experience of it spreading diseases, for example, as well. So you need to kind of balance the purpose of having the regulation. So, but there are two exemptions, like as well. It's most rigid when it comes to potatoes, and some like because there you have more severe diseases. If if a commercial potato grower get a potato disease in his field, it will be contaminated and not possible to cultivate potatoes for, I think it's 40 years or something. So you need, so it is important to really avoid diseases, but you need to balance what is practical. So I think that will be my kind of short answer, that it's more on inspections and trust based. And you asked about farmers' involvement in seed production. That is another characteristics with the Norwegian agriculture sector, that it's about the role of cooperatives, farmers' ownership. So it is not the farmers' union or farmers' organization itself producing seeds, but it is professional enterprises doing this, but the ownership of that farmers' union has a major share, both for those who are distributing seeds and multiplying seeds, and also our national breeding company. It is a company doing the breeding, but it's partly owned by the farmers' union as well. So that is how farmers are involved in a way, and we could say it's part of taking part and participate in important aspects of the field.
As I noticed, Isabel, you have used mostly the term of farmers in Norway, but do the state or amongst your community of scientists, do you consider using the peasants term, in terms of hue and drop?
Yeah, so that is, I guess, what you... In Norwegian, we usually use the word farmers, but also what is otherwise used in Norwegian is smallholder farmer. So that is outspread as well. So we have two farmers' union in Norway. The main one, it's called the Farmers' Union, with the biggest farmers as well being member. But we also have another farmers' union, which is called Smallholder Farmers' Union. So in that context, we use smallholder, and they are the ones member of Norwegian member of Via Campesina. Then you're talking about UNDROP. We were abstained in the voting, for your information as well. So we haven't program on implementing it, but it's just now a initiative from a party in parliament whether Norway should consider to sign, even though we abstained when it was the voting, but this is not decided.
Hello, I am Marika from Georgia. I'm representing here World March of Women. This is women organization uniting women around the world. So I am working on farmers' rights, and I have a question to Bell. So I wonder what is the regulation and restrictions regarding these varieties, especially wheat seeds. Can you share your experience if farmers are entitled to share and exchange seeds free, like without certification, and what are the regulations?
So I briefly mentioned what also put on the agenda to revise the seed regulation in Norway was that EU also passed some regulations on conservation varieties, which included also that you could register not only distinct and uniform and stable varieties, but also more heterogeneous material, and also varieties that didn't fulfill very rigid criteria on those. So part of the revision then, Norway also implemented some regulations on conservation varieties, giving more flexibility on the criteria on which varieties that is qualified to put on the list. And in this regard, I haven't checked if any wheat varieties are part of those that has been registered, but within this regulatory framework, it would be possible to then also register more traditional wheat varieties.
Could I also add something? Yeah. Sorry, for the EU, because I work a lot on the EU seed marketing legislation. I think you have two steps. So you have the registration of conservation varieties that can happen, that like Belle said, where you register and then you sell seeds, but they need to be certified. Even if it's conservation varieties, the seeds need to be certified. What you have in between is anything that is not marketing, because the seed marketing legislation only applies to seed marketing, so the commercial exploitation of seeds. There can be a lot of seed distribution and exchange that is not commercial exploitation. You could have participatory plant breeding, but you could also have educational projects, in situ conservation projects, just exchanges, etc. And in the EU, we have directives, so each law of the country is different. So in France, for instance, farmers can exchange in the framework of mutual aid, because they're helping out each other. In Denmark, you have instructions that have been published in 2014 on what it means to have a non-commercial relationship with seeds, and farmers can exchange and even sell small quantities of certain things if it's not commercial. So that threshold is, I think, interesting, is something to reflect on. Just even before registering varieties and selling certified seeds, a lot of things can happen before you're there.
One very short question. We saw that there are several contradictions between legal instruments in force. How we should manage under this situation? Can you say which legal act is higher?
Well, I'm a human rights lawyer, so my answer is clear. For me, the human rights, trump everything else. However, and you have inside, for instance, the international treaty and also the CBD, some articles that say that everything needs to be mutually supportive. So the treaties and all the instruments, whether it's UPOV or patents, you have to find a way to make them work together. It's not easy, obviously, but there are ways. The problem with UPOV 1991, for instance, is that the optional exception of farmers' rights is only usually given to certain species in the EU. So farmers don't have the right to exchange and save seeds of certain variety, certain crop species, like anything on vegetables, for instance. There's nothing. So there are ways to make it even more mutually supportive than it is today, even if you're stuck in UPOV 1991. You don't have to be stuck for once, but there's a lot of flexibility and there's opportunities to mutually support, and Belle has actually given a lot of examples of it. The inventory of the international treaty has good examples of that. It can be done, it's not impossible.
My name is Bülent Gülçubuk. I am working at Ankara University in Turkey. I am an academic person. In general, I am working about rural development and agriculture policy. First of all, thank you for both speakers. My question is for both speakers. Actually, Belle touched a little bit on about my question. And now, I think the world is in a dilemma. On the one side, industrial agriculture, food and seed production. On the other side, local seeds, small farmers, local markets, etc. And there are many legal regulations in the middle of the situation. And small farmers are struggling against the market and are struggling to survive, a kind of survive. In your opinion, what kind of a community organization can be established in the world and countries so that small farmers can hold on to the market and keep their local seeds alive? And also, what do you think about the impact of agriculture, climate change on local seeds? Because I think industrials, growers can adapt, but it's too difficult for small farmers. What do you think? Thank you very much for your responses.
yeah, how can you make sure that smallholder farmers are not completely left outside and can survive? First, I mean, I'm a lawyer, so I look at the law. First and foremost, the law cannot outlaw, so forbid what smallholder farmers do and need, and once what they're doing is legal, and it's recognized, that's first and foremost, then you can support it, provide support, and it can look very differently. Like Belle gave different examples. It could be through the financial help to establish a community seed bank. It could be participatory plant breeding programs. I know more about the European Union. In the EU, you've had Horizon projects, so these big, huge research projects that changed actually the law. So the first one was Solibam, and it was a participatory plant breeding program that was funded by the EU, where farmers and researchers started to talk with one another, and they started to develop populations. And that research program and others after that came, it challenged the law and the concept that a plant variety is the only thing that we need on the commercial seed market. And little by little, so we saw the regime of conservation varieties come, and then now we have organic heterogeneous material. We fought very hard for it. It was difficult, but it came because people started to talk to one another, researchers and farmers. So when you have these kinds of indirect projects, it can have a lot of impact, also on the law and policy. That would be my short answer.
Thank you, Fulya. Belle, if you have some words to say on the question.
Very, very good questions and big ones. So just very quickly then, to support the first thing about not outlawing, Regine usually calls this to create legal space for farmers as well, that they need to be able to operate and to support their organization, like farmers unions, farmers cooperatives. And how you do this need to be adapted to the local conditions and national conditions, to what will be the best model there. And yes, climate change is a concern, and I believe that diversity of seeds and diversity of agriculture methods would be important to meet those challenges, which we have to prepare for the unpredictable in a way. So the more diversity we have, the more possibilities we will be able, diversity both within seeds and properties to breed the seeds we need. The type of seeds, that the more heterogeneous varieties might be more resistant, but also in farmers' agriculture system. And then in advocating for this, also the new, for example, the Kunming-Montreal Global Framework for Biodiversity, adopted by the Convention on Biological Diversity, has a target 10 on agriculture, also promoting the sustainable use of biodiversity. And I think farmer seed systems is a perfect example of sustainable use of biodiversity. And you could use the agroecological approaches being recognized there as important.
Спасибо.
До свидания. Bye, guys.
До свидания.
Спасибо, до свидания.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.